Technology makes me sad. Makes me really sad, actually. A couple days ago we had internet issues, and today we had Twitch issues. There's a complete Twitch outage. It says I go live on the streaming software, and the Twitch channel is still offline. So here we are, recorded version on YouTube on 110sportsmedia.com. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day, even if it's not at the normal time from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern. But this is the Jmull show. We got a lot to get to, actually, and I was pretty excited about this particular show. But nonetheless, we will record it and go from there. Let me set the agenda of what we're going to talk about just a little bit real quick. Coming up in about 20 minutes, we'll talk minor league baseball being canceled, sort of what that means about relationships between Major League and minor league baseball, what that means for minor league baseball, sort of the hardships they're going through. And just a discussion about that, because minor league baseball, in terms of a sport played at the level that it's played, and a set of leagues playing at a certain level, it depends on something that other leagues that are comparable don't completely depend on like that. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Emoni Bates, arguably the best high school prospect since LeBron James, committed to Michigan State, the number one player in the class of 2022. Out of Michigan, committing to East Lansing, and Tom Izzo at Michigan State. We'll talk about that. If he actually ever gets to college, it's remained to be seen, but I have a couple things I want to talk about and using that as a jumping off point. And then we'll get to FYI and get out of here. But I want to start with something that's close to my hometown of Memphis, Tennessee, and that is yesterday the Mississippi governor signed a bill to remove the current Mississippi flag. This bill passed in the House at 91 to 23 votes, and in the Senate 37 to 14. And for those of you who don't know, Mississippi is very stuck in their ways. I mean, like most places, but for the most part, stuck in their ways isn't quite as bad as what it means for Mississippi being stuck in their ways. I mean, this is a state who didn't officially abolish slavery until February 7th, 2013. 2013, 7 years ago. They never actually sent in the official documentation until 2013 to abolish slavery in the state of Mississippi. So that's what you need to know about Mississippi. And I have, have friends from Mississippi, I have people I know who grew up in Mississippi, and it's not to say that there aren't really good people from Mississippi, because there are lots of good people from Mississippi. From a statewide perspective, from the optics of the state and how it looks to the rest of the country, it's not exactly a popular or highly thought of part of the United States. And this is, in 2001, there was sort of a push to change the flag, and it was basically a 2-to-1 vote on deciding to keep the flag, so it was not particularly close at all. And now we have basically the entire country pushing for Mississippi to change their flag, and it resulted in that exactly. People who are residents of the state of Mississippi who vote in Mississippi will go to the polls in November to vote for what the new flag will be. But the current flag, and the current flag, for those who don't know, it's laid out very similarly to the United States flag, just from the structure. The majority of it is one thing, and then up in the top left corner is a square, and instead of stars like there are in the United States flag, it's a Confederate flag. And so clearly that's not okay, and it hasn't been okay for a long time, but now we're getting to the point where it's not okay that it's not okay, if that makes sense. And that's the point I want to get to and use this as an example for, is that, and use this as an example to make the point that this push for equality and this unified front of people across states, cities, races is unlike any push I've seen in my lifetime. And now my lifetime is only, we're actually 5 days away from the 22nd year of my existence. So it hasn't been all that long, relatively speaking, but it's been a good chunk of time. I'm getting to that point. And of course, it wasn't around in the 60s for the civil rights movements or any of those things. But, when the brutal things that happened in Ferguson several years ago, I mean, there were riots in Ferguson and there was tension there, but it never really gained the traction across the country that George Floyd's killing gained, and it didn't turn into this unified front that we've seen in the last month and a half or so. I guess more, a month. So things are no longer going to be okay just because they're not thought of the way that, just because they for the most part have a different meaning than they used to. And let me explain it a little bit better. I mean, Mississippi had never gotten real pressure to change this flag. It's been wrong for a long time, but they've never gotten the pressure to change it. And they've still been able to host things, host NCAA championships of sorts if they earn the right to, rather than getting awarded, even under the Confederate flag policy of the NCAA. And then the SEC puts pressure on them to change the flag. If they want to host SEC championships, it turns into a national story. The entire country is a part of this push. And then you get to the point where Mississippi has no choice. And it's something that absolutely had to be done if they ever wanted to host NCAA championships again. And for the most part, there's no city in Mississippi that's big enough or, has the hotels to house something like the Final Four or a national championship, or, a college football playoff, any sort of championship of those sorts. But it still is a state that very much values their college sports. I mean, Mississippi State and Ole Miss, two very popular SEC schools, two popular SEC schools that spoke out in alliance with the SEC, and it's something that they've pushed for before. But both schools were very quick to jump on this opportunity and to be a part of the push for it, along with the NCAA. And this is, you can't find the Mississippi State flag anywhere on either campus, which is saying something, that not even your state schools, your biggest state schools, will put it on their campus anywhere. But we got to the point where words, symbols, and phrases, how they connect to history, matters more than it ever has, even if it's in a way that few people think about. For example, you can no longer say gator bait at University of Florida sporting events because gator bait's connection to history suggests one of inequality and one of slavery and racism. And that's we're getting to the point where, even though it's the widespread thought at this point about gator bait is that it's something that you say at Florida Gators sporting events. But just the connection to it and the idea that somebody can be alienated because of that is no longer okay, and no longer going to slide. And I think that's where this push for equality and this push for social justice is so different than it has been, because that wasn't happening. Even if people were upset, there wasn't a fundamental shift. And of course, we're still getting there as a country. That's indisputable. But there's been a fundamental shift in how this is approached, and we're looking at everything to make sure that this is taken out of our country as much as possible. And I think that's, and the removing of the Mississippi State flag is a perfect example of that, because in 2001, clearly the residents of Mississippi had no issue with it, and it wasn't being picked up by CBS News. And the story I read yesterday about this wasn't a local Memphis, Tennessee news outlet. Mississippi and Tennessee border, and Memphis is the county that Memphis is and borders Mississippi, and lots of people who work in Memphis live right across the border in the suburbs of Mississippi, in the suburbs that cross over into Mississippi, and it wasn't in a local Mississippi paper. It was in CBS News, national news, and it was all over the place, and that's not, and for a state that's ultimately fairly irrelevant from a national stage perspective. I mean, you don't see a lot of national news about the state of Mississippi, and this gained lots of traction very quickly. And I don't think, and I've certainly never been in a situation where I've seen a push quite to this level before, and quite frankly, it's really refreshing to see, and really great to see. Long way to go, of course, that's indisputable, but things like this happening is really impactful in my opinion, and really things to take note of, and to understand how this is different than any other so-called push for racial inequality, and I hope that continues to be that way as we move farther and farther away from the tragic killing of George Floyd, and as we move closer and closer to to making this less of a problem in our country. But coming up next, minor league baseball is canceled, and that's really tough, and we'll talk about that and some of my thoughts on that. But you're watching the Jmull Show, recorded on 110sportsmedia.com. All right, we're back on the Jmull Show. Thank you for joining us on a Wednesday, or if it's a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, whenever you're watching on YouTube on 110sportsmedia.com. Thank you so much for making us a small part of your day. Or if you're listening to the podcast version of this on iTunes or Spotify, we also very much appreciate you joining the show today. Admittedly, I don't think about minor league baseball that much. I don't think about Major League Baseball that much. It's I've thought about it more over the last couple months because of the current nature of the time in our world, but it certainly isn't at the top of my sports list, so to speak, and so it's very much something that I pay attention to, but don't spend a whole lot of time analyzing in my mind or talking about it and analyzing. So I will admit it. It didn't cross my mind that minor league baseball probably wasn't going to happen. It makes perfect sense, and we'll get to that here in a minute, but minor league baseball is not something I think about on a daily basis. So seeing on Tuesday that the minor league baseball announced that the 2020 season has officially been canceled was sort of a moment of, oh, right. And is yet another way that sports leagues are being impacted by this pandemic, and I want to be very careful here because the trouble in minor league baseball is closer, but comparing the trouble that Major League Baseball or the NFL might go through or the NBA go through to the struggles of normal people and people who don't make obscene amount of money and people who work for businesses that don't make an obscene amount of money, their times are so much tougher, relatively speaking, to the billionaires that sit at the top of Major League Baseball and the NBA. So I want to be very particular there. So everything we talk about here is relative, but minor league baseball is a lot closer. And players who are playing in minor league baseball parks are much closer to your, for lack of a better term, average Joe who goes to work every day. Because, these baseball players aren't making a whole lot of money. I mean, only 41 million fans across 176 teams came to minor league baseball games over the course of the 2019 season, which is a considerable amount. But compared to Major League Baseball, that's not a whole lot of not a whole lot of revenue. And then, of course, and this is what I want to get to eventually, and then you don't have the revenue from a TV deal that Major League Baseball does. So you're in a situation where now more than half of its 160 teams are in danger of failing, because not only will they not be able to play, they're not going to make any money, because Major League Baseball is going to make a ton of money this year. It's still going to be in the red, so to speak, but they're going to make a ton of money this year because all of the games that are televised on TV. Televised on TV, is that redundant? It might be. But they can go on without fans. In fact, from a business perspective, it's in their best interest to go on without fans. I suppose, if you don't play at all, you don't have to pay your players, which is, part of what owners were shooting for. But there's a considerable amount of money that can come from the TV deals that Major League Baseball has with the major networks in this country. Minor League Baseball doesn't even kind of have that. And when you consider the level of play, not even AAA is televised in really any significant way. I mean, that's the second most competitive league for the sport in this country, and they are completely dependent. It was estimated that 90% of revenue comes from ballpark tickets, concessions, parking, merchandise that's bought at the stadium, and then any stadium advertising done with local businesses. That's 90% of the revenue. And you know what 90%, what happens to businesses for the most part that lose 90% of their revenue for a year? A lot of them have to shut down, and that's what you're going to see from a lot of these minor league baseball teams. Is they're just going to be in such a tough position. I mean, the CEO and president, Pat O'Connor of minor league baseball, talking about every team having to go through furloughs, talking about his office having to go through furloughs, and talking about this being the unfortunate reality that there's just no money coming in, and it makes even less sense for them to play any sort of season, because it's a fans in the stands, as he said, business, because they don't make their money from any TV deals. And so if you're playing without fans, then you're losing money even faster, because it makes sense that you have to pay those players to pay those players to play, but there are no fans, so you're not generating revenue anywhere else, and you're losing money faster than you would otherwise. And I'm guessing that minor league baseball isn't exactly lucrative for anybody due to the nature of, roughly 4,000 fans per game. That was the average in minor league baseball last season. That's not a whole lot of wiggle room. And because, it's a family-oriented sport and a family-oriented environment, it's a pretty consistent thing, so you sort of know what you're going to get, and it almost doesn't matter if your team's any good, because it's just an easy place to take your 5 and 6 year old and run around on in Memphis. The Redbirds have a massive sort of field over the left field wall, It's called, and people will bring blankets and have a picnic out there, and there are bouncy houses, and it's a lot of fun. And that's a lot of the reason I've had events. I've been a part of events that's just back on the back porch out in the outfield, and you grab a couple hot dogs and do that kind of thing, and it's very much a family oriented environment. So the point is being that it doesn't really matter if a team is any good. People are still going to come to basically the same at basically the same rate as they're coming if the team is the best minor league baseball team in history. So it really is tough for minor league baseball because they just don't get money anywhere else. I mean, even the Korn Ferry Tour, which is the tour right below that, is basically the minor league tour of the PGA Tour, is televised on Golf Channel, and they receive revenue from that. So, I mean, they can go on without fans and still make money from these events. And minor league baseball just can't do that. They just have no option. It's one of the, it's really is a lesser of two evils, and even this, considerably lesser of two evils is still going to result in a bunch of guys losing their jobs. It's going to result in a lot of furloughs around the minor league baseball front office, but also the, administrative side of every team, and even leagues. I mean, their leagues will probably shut down because of this, and this is really unfortunate. And so, and I think that's obviously the most important part of this is just the amount of people who are involved in minor league baseball and who clearly love baseball, which I think is an important part as well, because nobody goes to almost every minor league baseball team, gets interns and has people who work for very little money just because there are people who love the sport and want to get their foot in the door however they can. And that's just a lot of people who aren't going to be able to get their foot in the door this season, and a lot of people who are going to lose their jobs, a lot of people who are going to be furloughed, and just a lot of people who have people depending on them, which is obviously the most important part of this, and the most important part of how this pandemic is impacting everybody, and is the reason that people should just wear their freaking mask so that we can sort of reconstruct this economy and try to get back to normal as quickly as possible. But that's a completely different conversation. And then, of course, you have the lack of development, and players make it to the majors every year because they were able to get through the minors. I mean, they're good players every year. I mean, top prospects in the minors developing. I mean, it really is a system that works and produces good things for teams. I mean, the Dodgers, the Red Sox made a mistake trading Mookie Betts, but they got a top prospect out of the minors. That's worth something. And try not to make this about business as much as just about people, but it's worth, the minor leagues are there for a reason, to help teams sort of craft the next generation of their team, and to develop prospects and have guys come up and in case there are injuries and they need to film it. And I know there's things in place for the Major League Baseball season to have an extended roster, at least for the first couple weeks of the season, so that they can, if a COVID outbreak among their team happens, then you can still play games. And I realize that's going to happen there, and these top prospects, but the very top prospects are going to find their way onto rosters this season, at least for the first part. But that's about it. And then you're left with this massive contingency of minor league baseball players who are missing out on an entire season of development and an entire season of paychecks, which is just the really tough part of this as well. That is completely unfortunate. And I hope it's one of those things that doesn't make too long of a lasting impact, I mean, it will certainly be. I just hope that they'll be able to survive this for the most part, and get back to normal, so to speak, within a couple of years, because I mean, this is going to have a multi-year impact on minor league baseball, but hopefully it doesn't completely drown them to a point where they can't get back on their feet. But coming up next, we'll talk Emoni Bates, possibly the best prospect out of high school since LeBron James, his commitment to Michigan State and Tom Izzo, and just a larger discussion on the state of college basketball as a whole. But that's coming up next on the Jmull Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the Jmull Show on this Wednesday. You know, it's tough. Last week we had some internet connection issues. This week we have Twitch connection issues, and that's really tough. And I was doing some research. You know, I was trying to start the show, and it said on the streaming service that I was live, and Twitch said I wasn't live. So, and I did some research, and clearly it was a site-wide thing, and lots of users trying to stream that couldn't. So it happens. A little upsetting, a little frustrating, but we're getting through it. Thanks so much for joining us on this Wednesday or this Tuesday, Friday, Monday, whenever you're watching. I appreciate it. Make sure you go over to 110sportsmedia.com. Check out those the articles we have on the site over there right now. Some really good content over there at this point, and if you haven't gotten a chance to check it out, you should do so. But what I want to talk about now is Emoni Bates. And for those of you who don't know, Emoni Bates is arguably the best high school prospect since LeBron James, and one of 7. So 247 Sports gives every player a rating. And Emoni Bates is one of the 7 players since the site started ranking players in 2003 to get a perfect rating of 1,000 on the site, alongside players like Greg Oden, LeBron James, and a handful of others. So this guy is 16 and a half years old. Won't turn 17 in this calendar year. And rightfully so, is already being considered. He's considered a transcendent talent. He's considered the best player in high school basketball. And that's backed up by the fact that even though his season was cut short because of COVID-19, he won the Gatorade Boys National Player of the Year Award as a sophomore. You want to know who else won it as a sophomore? Not LeBron. Nobody. That's an honor that Emoni Bates and Emoni Bates alone has achieved, and not even LeBron James did that as a sophomore. So the hype is certainly there, and even though this is a 2022 a 2022 guy, number 1 player in the class of 2022, he's already getting the hype, and there are few people in the amateur level of the sport, even in college, who are considered as good as this guy, and he's certainly far and away the most the best high school player in the country right now. Averages 32, 9, 5, 2, and 2 or something like that as a sophomore, and he's just going to get better as he gets a little stronger. He has a very Kevin Durant type length. He doesn't look from the videos I've seen, he doesn't look quite as quick as Durant, and he's not quite as tall, but has the same sort of stringy body type, and he can shoot it. He can actually absolutely shrug it, put it on the floor, and he does a lot of things really, really well, of course. But, this is the second week in a row. So last week, you saw Cade Cunningham re-up his commitment to college basketball, and unless something completely unforeseen happens or, something less unforeseen like there not being a college basketball season, Cade Cunningham will play for Oklahoma State in 2020-2021 season, despite that Oklahoma State postseason ban, which is something we've talked about on this show in the last week or so. And then this week you have a guy in Emoni Bates who, at this point, I mean, unless I'm just way off, and I don't think I am, and we'll get to some other comments here in a moment, but at this point, going to college is a possibility, because if it wasn't, there's literally no reason to commit to Michigan State right now, unless going and playing at Michigan State is at least part of the equation still, or at least part of the options he's weighing in. There's, of course, there's a chance that the NBA will waive the one and done rule in 2021, and there's a chance that he'll be able to go straight to the draft. And if he's able to go straight to the draft, he'll probably go straight to the draft, and that's certainly something I acknowledge. But there are two things that I refuse to waver on. The one is that college basketball is going to be fine. There might not be the same level of household names, and to be a household name at the college basketball level is really quite hard to do. I mean, Zion did it. I guess Trae Young got pretty close to it, but even Marvin Bagley III, who had a really great season at Duke, I wouldn't consider him a household name. Buddy Hield had a really great season in the middle of this decade. Wouldn't consider him a household name. John Morant, great, first-team All-American out of Murray State. And he wasn't a household name coming out of college basketball, and he's getting there as part of the Memphis Grizzlies now. But my point being is that it's really hard to do that anyways. And the number of players who can legitimately skip going to college and be on the right track to get to the NBA is going to be so small, relatively speaking, that college basketball is not going to look a whole lot different. If anything, college basketball is going to be filled with players who spend more time at school from a ratio perspective. And you'll still get guys like Trae Young, who wasn't supposed to be a one and done, and then took the entire world by storm and became a one and done. And John Morant, who was solid his freshman year and then absolutely exploded to average 24, 10, and 5 his sophomore year, and then he's clearly going to be a top 2 pick in the NBA draft. Like, that's crazy. Out of Murray State, nonetheless. And so the college basketball landscape isn't going to change all that much. And it's not going to feel all that different because, I mean, apart from the 2015 Duke team, what team has won a national championship on one-and-done guys who just sort of took college basketball by storm as a freshman? I mean, that team had Jahlil Okafor, Tyus Jones, and Justice Winslow, but they also had really good veterans on that team. And you have Villanova led by, in 2018, you had Villanova led by Jalen Brunson, and then you had Josh Hart, who played all 4 years at Villanova. North Carolina has never won a title on the back of a bunch of freshmen. I mean, look how good they were this year when they had one of the most exciting freshmen in the country. And now I got Cole Anthony got hurt, but UNC was bad this year. And when they're great because they have guys like Luke May, who went from a walk-on to one of the best players in the ACC this season. I mean, this decade. Joel Berry III, Justin Jackson, Kennedy Meeks. And so I think what this shows is a couple things. One, does it show that Emoni Bates is going to play college basketball? No. But does it show that the top players and the classes in recruiting classes are still considering college pretty heavily? Yeah, I think it does. And every year, yeah, we'll continue to see players decide to go the route of R.J. Hampton, who went over to Australia to play basketball instead of going to college. You'll see guys just take the year off and train. You'll see guys, if they get hurt, they'll just stop playing, like James Wiseman did, which is, or suspended for any reason, declared ineligible, just leave the team. You'll see guys who get an invite to the G League program go to the G League program, but it's clearly still a viable option to go to college. And that sounds obvious, but I think there's lots of overreacting done about how this is going to completely change the scope of college basketball, and I just don't think that's true. I mean, the best teams in college basketball every year are teams that have veterans of the sport. I mean, Duke had the best team on paper of the decade, in my opinion, with Cam Reddish, Zion Williamson, and R.J. Barrett, and they couldn't even get to the Final Four. And I know the NCAA tournament is a different beast, and they got to the Elite Eight, but the point is the same. I mean, you got Virginia with Kyle Guy and DeAndre Hunter, and a plethora of elite, experienced college basketball players, being the last one standing. That's the case more times than not. And that will continue to be the case, and there will continue to be great freshmen, but, experience in the tournament and guys who have been around the sport, I think is going to continue like it has, be the most important part, and teams that win the national championships will continue to have a mix of young talent and experience and great leaders, and that's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And we're certainly not going to see a decrease in the level of play on the college basketball level anytime soon. And I think players like Cunningham and Bates, at least to a certain extent, will continue to choose college because, quite frankly, it's a cooler experience, and it's from a publicity standpoint. You tearing up the Division I college basketball at the highest level on national TV every night, from a draft perspective and from a stock perspective, is, in my opinion, way more beneficial than sitting in a G League program where you're never on national TV, or going and playing overseas where, it's just harder to get the recognition for that, obviously, because you're overseas, and the NBA, to be very, very obvious, is played in this country, and that makes things a little bit harder as well. But I think it's interesting that Bates committed this early. It was sort of out of the blue, and we'll see if he ever actually gets to Michigan State. But for right now, in my opinion, the fact that he did commit to Michigan State is telling enough that college basketball is still part of the equation, and he hasn't exactly ruled that out, even if the popular consensus is that he might not ever play a game of college basketball. But we shall see. If nothing else, it's fun to talk about, and gives people a reason to go look up Emoni Bates highlights, and they're pretty spectacular. But coming up next, we'll get to FYI, including a guy who's getting paid by the Mets today, again, for the 9th time, and he will until 2035. But we'll talk about that when we come back. You're watching the Jmull Show on 110sportsmedia.com. We're back on the Jmull Show on a Wednesday. Let's wrap up here with some FYI. We got some good FYIs and a little something I want to talk about. Number one, FYI, Bobby Bonilla is getting paid his annual $1.1 million by the Mets today, which is just kind of a hilarious thing to think about because he's still on the Mets payroll. For those of you who don't know, the Mets will pay Bobby Bonilla on July 1st $1,193,248 every year until 2035. Because in 2000, the team opted to buy out the remaining $5.9 million of Bonilla's contract, and they agreed to make annual payments of almost $1.2 million for 25 years starting July 1st, 2011, including a negotiated 8% interest. This is hilarious. This is one of those things that, is glossed over every year by pretty much everybody except, baseball fans and Mets fans. And because of the current situation, this is trending on Twitter this morning. And that just makes me laugh because it's ultimately not a big deal, but is pretty rare. And for your information, which is the whole point of this, Bobby Bonilla is now 57. So let's say it's 20. So he'll be 72 before he stops getting paid by the Mets. And the last time he made an appearance in an MLB game was 2001. So 34 years after his official last MLB appearance, Bobby Bonilla will still get paid to play baseball. And that makes me laugh. Is a pretty funny quirk about the Mets payroll. And it's really a tough year to have to pay $1.1 million to Bobby Bonilla. It's funny because of the prorated salary. Some of the guys on the payroll who play for the Mets are going to make less money this year than Bobby Bonilla, and that's just the idea of that makes me laugh. And then my FYI number 2. Zion Williamson is on the cover of 2K Next Gen, and if you don't understand why that's the case, then that's on you, and you shouldn't be all that upset about it. Really, you should just be glad that they didn't put him on the cover of the full game and they put Damian Lillard on that instead. Because it wouldn't, everyone saw the promo of 2K. I think it was part of the PlayStation 5 sort of unveiling, but it was Zion in the promo video. It wasn't anybody else. So really, for all these people who are outraged that it wasn't Luka or John Morant or any of these other guys, you just need to open your eyes and figure out how this works. For the most part, Damian Lillard wasn't the best player in the NBA this past season. He was great. He was really good, but he wasn't the best. I'm not sure why people are so outraged by this, because this is, a business, and putting Zion on the front of that game is much more important. Not important, that's the wrong word. It makes much more sense from a business perspective than putting anybody else on it, even if players like John Morant had a better season than him, or Luka Doncic is far and away better than Zion at this point. You just need to figure it out, because Zion is much more popular than both of those players at this point. And when you keep comparing somebody to LeBron in terms of how excited people are that he's in the NBA, it's not hard to connect those dots. So the people outraged on Twitter about it, first of all, find other things to be outraged about. It's just not that big a deal. And second, figure out that this is how it was always going to be, and how it's going to be until Zion either proves that he's not going to be, he's just going to be an average NBA player, which I don't think is going to be the case, but until there's a reason for them to not do it, it's going to keep happening, so you might as well get over it. And then, of course, if you're watching this on Wednesday, Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have 2 shows on the 110 Sports Network. Touchline Talk with Josh Doring at 11 a.m. Eastern. And then Around the Bases with Chris Brown. Chris Brown we've had on the show a couple of times. began his show yesterday, and he'll be back on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So 3 shows on the 110 Sports Network right now. My show Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 11 to noon, and then those 2 shows 11 to noon and 1 to 2 Eastern Standard Time for Chris and Josh. But that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for making us a small part of your day. Sorry again for technical difficulties, and we'll hope that doesn't happen again. But make sure you follow me on Twitter at the Jmull, at 110 Sports on Twitter as well. Go to 110sportsmedia.com. Check out the content over there. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, new content every week, and we're trying to pump out as much as possible. But I believe that's all we have. Thank you so much for joining this edition of the Jmull Show, and we'll see you hopefully on Friday.